My name is Kwatuuma. I am from the Hoopachusett Nation here on Vancouver Island. So welcome to the island, and thank you for the welcoming to Nanaimo territory. It's always an honor to be here. I've come here my whole life. Well, Nanaimo to me is always just the malls and Costco, but I know so much more than that. It's beautiful. I love it here, and I'm very grateful to be here today. Thank you to the organizers for doing such a fantastic job with this conference. Clean Energy BC we're honored to be part of this and for me to moderate this panel with my esteemed friends and colleagues. It's really exciting time for our industry, for our province, and for First Nations. I want to thank Chief Roberts and Dallas for bringing our culture into how we conference. I think that's really a special thing for me as First Nations person, going to many conferences. So with that, I want to ground what we do where I come from. I kind of look to describe what we do and ground it in our culture. And for me, it's Hishimthua. It's a word that comes from my elders that my uncle, Rod Sayers, Kwatuuma, recorded. And it means coming together to work together for a common purpose. And I think that's what we're doing here for energy, to ensure that we are a clean energy superpower, that we have enough clean, affordable, renewable electricity to keep our lights on, to provide to new customers as we meet rising electricity demand. With that, I want to pass it over to my panel to give a short introductions to themselves, starting with Chief.
Gjoka. Good morning, everybody. I'm Chris Roberts. I'm the elected Chief Councillor with Weewakam First Nation in Campbell River. Just about an hour and a half, hour 45, depending how fast you drive. North of here is the home community. Our territory expands into the mainland inlet of Lochborough Inlet, just across from us. It's been my home for my whole life. I'm happy to be here as part of this panel to talk about wind energy. We were successful in winning a bid in the last call for power with our partner Capstone. I think some representatives of Capstone are here today, and it's you know, just the beginning of this journey, and I look forward to sharing more with you about it, what it means for our community, the processes that we're going through to engage with our neighbors, other impacted nations and stakeholders, and what it means for the whole North Island and Vancouver Island, really, as power sovereignty is an issue we need to address. Gjoka.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Greg Perrins, the Senior Manager of Indigenous Relations with BC Hydro. And over the last couple of years, I've been working almost exclusively on the call for power and energy acquisition, so working quite closely with Cole and a number of other folks in this room on the design of the First Nations economic participation model for the call, 2024, and once again coming here in 2025. So grateful to be able to be on this panel and talk about some of the really cool work that we've done with industry and First Nations that I think really touches on the themes that I've heard so far today around kind of partnership and mutual benefit through collaboration between First Nations, industry, and the Crown.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Honored to be here today. My name is Gjoka, and I'm with Innergex Renewable Energy. I'm the Government Relations Lead for Western Canada, and we're a Canadian-founded company with over 30 years of experience working across Canada, the US, Chile, and France. We're looking at BC as not just an opportunity, but a long-term investment. We've been operating and developing in the province for the last 20 years. We've got 22 operating assets, and we were successful in the 2024 call for power in getting contracts for 3 new wind farms. We've got a capital investment total of roughly $4.6 billion. So BC isn't just a province that we're looking to expand into. It's one that we're deeply embedded in. So grateful for the conversation here today, and thank you for having me.
And thank you. And with that, I have a bunch of questions that I'd like to ask you, and we won't be able to get through all of them because we wanted to open it up to you all for a Q&A afterwards. So we're just going to jump right into the call for power. So thank you, Greg, for mentioning that 2024 call for power. You may not know, some of you may know, may not, but there was 10 projects that were selected, 9 wind, 1 solar. There's about 5,000 gigawatt hours of energy, same as Site C. And it was historic equity ownership in that most of our majority owned by First Nations. And it's really raising the bar across the country for Indigenous equity. So my first question is more geared towards, well, to all of you. What do you see as the most important factors for nations to understand wind opportunities and resources in their territories and to influence how projects move forward, including through permitting and commercial negotiations? You want? Yeah, sure, yeah.
We'll jump right into the difficult questions. The most important factors to consider. My experience is a little bit unique because I didn't realize we had a wind resource in our territory. We were really caught off guard with the call for power. And as a matter of fact, to be truthful, a colleague here, and it was actually Sarah, says, hey, there's some people from these wind energy companies that are trying to get a hold of you. You should check your emails. Lo and behold, there was this outreach of from data that was quite old. Wind had been investigated in the territory over 10 years ago, and at the time wasn't really thought to be feasible. And the run of the river stuff kind of was what was the dominated the space. And it was the furthest thing from my mind that there was going to be a call for power coming anytime soon, with Site C being built, and we were going to be good. Demand side management was going to help us reduce the load. But actually, about 3 years ago, I started to get some indication that BC Hydro didn't really have enough power. That came to us from major industries, say like land-based salmon farming, that was looking at situating in the territory, and there was no ability to commit that they have the power needs for them anytime soon. That's important because that gave us the confidence to be able to say, well, hang on, if there's an opportunity here, like there's a lot of technical stuff we have to figure out, but on its face, we're interested. And then we end up getting excited about it because we engaged, we had to build our team quickly to be able to add to our capacity to meaningfully understand what was presented. And like anything, we're here to talk about resource opportunities, and I think the tone has been set as far as Indigenous people. The thing that comes to mind first is, where's this going to go? And then it showed us a map. Oh, I know where that is. I elk hunt there every year with my family, with my son. What are going to be the impacts to wildlife in elk? Coincidentally, it's in an area where 4 nations together purchased a share with Western Forest Products, now known as Kwatuuma. This area is smack dab in the middle of this forestry open area. What type of economic impacts is it going to have on our forestry operations? Then a whole slew of questions came through. I think I'm getting off point from your question, Cole, but really it was just the need for us to do our homework and talk to people that have had wind farms. It's not a new technology. We knew that. So, and we had some colleagues and through the networking at conferences such as these to reach out to, in the Peace region and in northern BC where wind farms have been in place for many years, and to learn from them and hear some of their experiences. I'll leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I think just building on some of Chief Roberts' comments, I think we're in an interesting period here with the clean energy sector where there hadn't been calls for power for 15 odd years, and now we've had back-to-back years with calls. So I think there's really kind of the theme of today, a really re-emerging opportunity in that sector for economic growth and partnership. And then I think another key piece, it creates opportunity, particularly for First Nations, as Cole touched on, the calls for power in 2024 and again in 2025 include a First Nations economic participation model that requires at least 25% First Nations ownership for a project to be eligible for an EPA. And as well, there's also a financial incentive for proponents to enter into partnerships, non-equity partnerships with First Nations will adjust the bid price down. So that I think from that model, there's a real opportunity for First Nations to participate and benefit in a really meaningful way from clean energy projects. A couple of other points I would flag, I think, as well as just, that there are a number of First Nations who are real leaders in this sector that have a lot of experience. So I think there's a great opportunity to learn from other First Nations and how they've been successful in the sector. And as well, there's a number of Indigenous organizations, First Nations organizations in the province that are available, to provide supports, help build the capacity for nations to participate in the sector. And I think the steering committee that Clean Energy BC just struck, that we'll learn a bit more about today, is a great example of that. So those are a couple of additional points just to build on Chief's comments.
So I actually just got back from Winnipeg last night. I was in Winnipeg for the Manitoba Wind Indigenous Equity Summit that was put on by one of the industry associations, and it was very interesting to get a sense of the room of how nations there look at opportunities in wind. And something that stood out to me is how much they looked at BC, how nations in BC have participated and really got involved in the last call for power, trying to emulate that into the opportunity in their province. So I think for upcoming opportunities here in BC, I think nations understanding their power, whether it's it's political, economic, relational, and harnessing the opportunity and really being embedded in these projects will be great. I think that we're setting an example, and that's a really exciting place to be across Canada. So, yeah.
That's great. And maybe just building on that around meaningful partnerships. What does that look like to each of you? And how do we build and to ensure that there are equitable, meaningful partnerships between First Nations and industry and First Nations and utilities? Whoever wants to jump in.
The meaningful partnerships piece, there's so much to it, and the opening speakers today talked about the relationship, and I'm thinking about our project, and that was one of the biggest challenges, is that we had to build trust really fast. Someone knocking on our door that they want something, they see an opportunity. That's never a good place to start to build a relationship with the First Nation community. The urgency that Minister Dix spoke about, I think at not Generate, what was the one before that?
The Energy Summit.
The Energy Summit. I think the urgency for these projects to be built. So I guess we started from a place of trust. They went through the process of explaining to us their experiences with other nations. They really quickly shared, as a reference, I guess you could call it, a recent project that was done in Alberta, an open invitation to speak to their representatives. We never did make it out there to visit it yet, but the fact that the company had a track record and it was kind of just really clear and transparent to show how they've done projects in other areas. They've got examples of a project they built with BC as they run a river, I believe, might be with Tla'amin. So yeah, that was really helpful for us because it takes time, and in this recent call, we just didn't have that time. So we took a bit of a leap of faith, and again, going back to assembling the team, and I never really like to give too many plugs to consultants or lawyers, but having a good relationship with them and ones that you can trust that understand how we look at things is what enabled us to come to grips with, we can work some of these things out as we go on. We can sign a definitive agreement that has enough, that has the strong goalposts there, but there's a lot of work left to do, and that's where the sort of, I guess the truth comes out, and I'm happy to say that things are still going in a good direction.
Yeah, you mentioned a challenge that we have, which is, as Minister Dex called it, urgency. I think you said it 48 times, and it is urgent. We need power by 2028 at the earliest. And so that's a challenge for us, Greg, for designing a procurement that works for First Nations, for industry. How has BC Hydro approached that?
Yeah, I think one of the reoccurring themes when we go out and talk to First Nations and talk to industry is that the urgency, the really expedited timelines do create challenges. And so I think a couple of ways we've tried to respond to that. I think one is being really proactive in continually engaging and collaborating with First Nations industry, even kind of in between the call periods, to get feedback, get ideas of how we can make adjustments so that we can continuously improve the model. And I think some of the examples on the 2024 call where we had a really short period of time to engage and design, we still tried to do that in a really collaborative way. And Cole, you were a real leader in that. I think one of the things that we did is, and you touched on it, Chief, a little bit, was within getting into the weeds a little bit, understood that it would be really difficult to have a fully executed, detailed equity arrangement in the period of time that we had. So we established a process based on feedback from First Nations where there was verification points throughout kind of key milestones in the project life cycle to ensure that the equity ownership was in place and so that there was still further time to kind of flesh out the details over the kind of project life cycle. But you had to have it in place before COD. So I think that's kind of continuing the dialogue, continuing to get feedback, I think is one of the key areas. And I think the other part of it is kind of a kind of cousin to that point, is investing in the long-term relationships through, you know, First Nations, directly with the First Nations we work with, and as well through First Nations organizations, so that we have that kind of structure and resources in place to continue that dialogue. So I think those are a couple of the ways we've gone about trying to deal with the really expedited timelines that we're working on.
For Innergex, partnerships with nations have always been foundational to our development. So we've got 40 partnerships across Canada, 26 here in BC. We all know that there was no opportunity in the province for about 15 years, but when other companies, and no disrespect to them, had to pack up shop because there was no opportunities and you know, look at other jurisdictions where there was, we stayed in BC. With having so many operating assets, it wasn't a question even whether we were going to stay in BC, but during those 15 years, we took that as an opportunity to build partnerships, nurture them, have it be done at the speed and the pace in which trust is actually built. So we were fortunate to be able to do that. We see that moving forward as the model. Obviously these opportunities are coming up, so we're having to respond, but we've got the foundation there because over those 15 years and over the last 3 years since the call was announced, we've continued to do that work and really get a sense of how nations see these projects benefiting their communities ultimately, and building that into the model and into what the project looks like.
That's great. No, thanks for that. And yeah, Innergex has a number of partners across the country, and I know that they're really positive and they're built really well. Just building on that, do you have any lessons learned that you have, or any considerations for nations here who are considering wind opportunities in their territories? What are some of the economic or environmental considerations that they should think about?
Yeah, so we've got obviously experience building in other jurisdictions. In Canada, you know, we've built in Quebec, across globally in the US, Chile, and France. As far as what we bring, how we bring that experience to BC, obviously there's a recognition that it's not a copy-paste model. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution either. So I think it's just recognizing how complex and unique BC is, and understanding nations and their priorities when it comes to economics, when it comes to environmental stewardship. If it's not right the first time, when we're looking at a project, we go back to the drawing board. We co-develop until it's perfect. And that's how we approach development in the province.
No, thanks for that. That's great. Chief, what type of advice do you have for First Nations and how they approach these calls for power and engaging with industry or BC Hydro?
I shouldn't have to think about this too hard because these questions were prepared well in advance and giving you a lot of time to.
You're going out of sequence, which is throwing us off.
Yeah,
Don't let them know
it's
that,
okay.
Chief. Let them think we're off the cuff here.
Yeah, that's way better that way. I think you got to do your homework. You got to look inwards to figure out where you're at and where your deficiencies are. I started to think about how could this have been a lot better? How could we have been better prepared? We typically like to understand what we have in our territory as far as that they could support a prosperous economy in a sustainable way. And the fact that we didn't know we had wind as a resource, it was surprising, and so it took us a lot to kind of move that ahead. But now we know now that I've learned what it takes, the data required to be able to understand the viability of a project, where ideally we think it ought to be built, we probably would have been investing as us with our neighbors on Met Tower data years ago, had we known that this was going to happen. Had BC Hydro signaled to us in their 10-year IRP planning what was going to, and I think, anyway, we won't go there right now as far as how that happened, but just trying to build on this to get a little more fulsome responses. Be prepared as nations. there's always going to be projects that are going to surprise us that we didn't realize we had, and we're going to have to come to grips with it. But what we did have was a 3-year engagement, not complete yet, integrated resource management planning process. We still haven't come up with the right term in our language for that, a comprehensive land use planning initiative from a forestry perspective. That's what gave us the confidence to enter into the investment into the forest partnership with the Western Forest Products, because we were starting to build a very comprehensive understanding of the land base and the things that we care about that happen on there. And so the fact that this is in the same geographic area in the territory, we've already got, and that was a lot of engagement with knowledge holders, with elders, what's important to us. The thing that pops to first into people's minds is elk and the impacts to elk and their habitat. So to have that as a basis to engage with any type of proposal that comes our way. And then in other areas, which I can maybe talk about later, as I get the floor to talk about other things on my mind, is just understanding our territory, our engagement in marine planning, our investment in what we need to have the infrastructure to be able to assess, collect data, analyze it, and understand where we're at and what the potential impacts of a proposed idea might be. And what's really awesome is when the nation's the one that identifies those and goes and looks for a partner to invest with them. So I'll leave it there. Cole, thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Chief. And Paul, we're just going to go with it. We're going to go with the flow as we go. But now I'll give you guys a break. I'll pass over to Greg. All right, so I'm going to ask you all the tough questions now.
I told you softballs only, Cole.
Just kidding. And I just want to thank everyone. You can keep asking your questions on Slido. We are going to get to it, so keep your questions coming. There's a lot of good ones. But I want to have a quick question around finance. And just a quick update on whether or not CIB is able to come through on another tailored package for the 2025 call for power for First Nations equity component, and if you have an update on that.
Yeah, so just a bit of background or context. So with the 2024 call, there was a First Nations equity ownership requirement. And early on in the engagement, the feedback we got from First Nations was, that's great, that's something we've been looking for and that we want, but then there's a practical reality of how does a First Nation access capital to purchase that equity. So in turn, ourselves, BC Hydro, as well as the First Nation Energy and Mining Council, worked with the Canada Infrastructure Bank to secure their participation in the 2024 call. So I believe all the projects that ultimately were awarded EPAs, there was CIB financing involved. And so I think that played a critical role in the success of the previous call. And CIB provides financing at a very kind of competitive, advantageous rate. So for the 2025 call, we are continuing to work with CIB. Those discussions are still ongoing, so I can't give a definitive update, but we expect to be able to provide a more definitive answer in about a month or so. But we are still in discussions with CIB.
Thanks, Greg. And so now I'm going to touch on a few questions that we have here so we can get to some of your questions. And there's some really good ones. And the one here on the bottom that I think is an important one that we should touch on, perhaps, Greg, you can provide some insights into this, is with the call for power, how do we ensure First Nations benefit in terms of equity but also non-equity benefits, including those procurement opportunities? And this question is, what is the path forward for encouraging and engaging Indigenous-owned companies in the procurement process and construction of these projects?
Yeah, so I think BC Hydro does a lot of work on Indigenous procurement for the projects that we build, that we own. The call for power is a bit different because we're purchasing the power from private companies like Innergex. So we aren't building the projects, we're entering into a contract to purchase the power. So we don't have the same direct kind of leverage that we would, or ability to enter into direct procurement with First Nations. But we did hear through the engagement on the design of the First Nations economic participation model a really strong interest from First Nations in being able to participate in the projects, either as equity owners and or through procurement, other types of benefits. So in the model that was designed, there's a dollar price adjuster, so the project is kind of evaluated at a dollar rate lower, scaled way down. If there's a letter of support from the First Nation who's a non-equity owner, and that's the nation's receiving some form of benefit that they're willing to provide that letter. Typically, it's a procurement type of arrangement. So that's one of the ways through the call for power that we've tried to incentivize projects that we aren't building, but that we're, have market power, where we're through our purchasing power, that they are providing procurement opportunities. So basically just by creating a financial reward for the proponent to do so.
It's a good question, and then as I listen to Greg here, I think there's there's room for improvement with the model, right? Because that wasn't really made clear. There's this dollar value per megawatt hour. That's the non-equity participating nations. As a co-owner of a project, it's an interesting perspective. I've got the experience of trying my damnedest to beat up on BC Hydro to make sure we get some directed procurement of a major projects like the John Hart Dam, seismic upgrades that's just happening right now, and it's going swimmingly, but not as much contract opportunities to us as we'd like to see. Not all the nations in this, the territory whose project is in, not all the nations are involved as equity owners. That poses a challenge. That's work that I'm doing with our partner to engage them. And when we look at procurement, not to mention, the economics the modeling looks really good, but it's just a model. And I know, like I said, I hunt there every year, and it's steep. It's hard to get to. It remains to be seen as far as how the costs are going to pan out. But there's a $750 million build in the territory. That's huge for us. We need to be able to make sure we're positioned to to take advantage of those procurement opportunities. And I see some of our partners in the room with transmission, things like that. But to be an owner and now have to weigh that off of the cost of the project and make sure that it's done competitively. But it actually gets kind of annoying that industry and government look at the First Nations participation in procurement as a tax, like somehow it's going to be more expensive and you can't do it, because it's the way that you set it up that results in that. If there was a more of an open book, transparent process to do it, we can get there. And that's what's really the meaningful participation that has longevity. These projects come and go, but to have businesses owned and operated by nation members, that's where you're going to get stable household income and employment to build resilient communities. So, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks for that. And that was a great answer. And it's always something that we need to. That's why your feedback is important, so we can learn how we can incorporate into the calls for power. There are a few more questions here around technology. So perhaps this one's over towards Greg. There's been a question around Roanoke River and why it hasn't been included. And there's also a question on bioenergy. I think those are two technologies that have been explored quite a bit by First Nations. So maybe touch on what technologies you'd expect or how they're going to be factored into the next call for power in 2025.
Yeah, so the call's open to any clean energy projects as defined by the Clean Energy Act. So it is all the technologies that meet that criteria are eligible. So Run of the River would meet that criteria. But then in terms of the competitiveness of the different technologies, it comes down to BC Hydro goes through a process to really look at the system needs, the cost of those projects, and then does an evaluation to determine what's the most efficient way to meet the energy need. And so it was largely wind in the 2024 call with one solar project, and it comes down to cost and system need that really drives that. Another component that was announced with the 2025 call was this RFEOI, so it was just a request for expressions of interest around base load technologies. So we're starting to look at really large scale, utility scale projects that could meet base load demand. And that could, I think, signaling that we're looking at other ways to meet that, and there could be other technologies that are considered through that as well.
And I want to come back to partnerships, and it's a long road to get there. So how does Innergex and yourself approach early engagement with First Nations, particularly when there's such a short amount of time?
Well, I think that partnerships must be built at the speed of trust. So we start early engagement. We look at working with a nation where the project is we're hoping to have it located, and identifying priorities. So looking at what kind of equity they're wanting to have in the project, if there's an opportunity for further partnership with overlapping nations, economic return, design, what it looks like, what it can be for the nation. So early engagement should start early, day one, and be fulsome and robust, and really taking into consideration governance, but also what the community feels is in the best interest of the community. Yeah.
That's great. And I want to touch on another question down here, and it's around how these wind energy projects support broader community priorities, such as housing, education, or clean water.
I can answer that.
Sure.
So projects typically return a lot of tax dollars back into the provincial and municipal reservoir, we'll call it, through property tax, wind rental payments, crown land lease, so on and so forth. It's millions of dollars, which are then injected back into the local economies, local communities, and can be used for schools and upgrades to schools and community centers, exactly what the community needs at said time.
I got one little, because I've been talking about wind energy a lot, and our phones, how they spy on us. I got all these really weird and odd news feeds about things that I don't know how much to believe in. But I just saw a wind turbine blade that was converted to some sort of house. So there's one abstract way.
Oh, there's new opportunities for decommissioning.
Thanks for that. And let's see, wind energy, yes, but it's more like experimental, and I always confuse tidal and wave, I'm sorry. But there is a Mauship Muchatla is exploring one with the ASA program at UVic. But it'll be a challenge to make that into a utility scale project. How can one? So just looking at time, I want to pass it over now to closing comments, because we do have a few exciting announcements following our panel here. So I just want to pass it to all of you to answer this question. 1 year from now, what would success under the call for power look like for your community or the communities you work with?
I mean, not to be greedy, but maybe I'd have another project on the go. I've learned that there's additional opportunities in the territory. So, what would be more successful is we'd have a more robust participation from the nations whose territories are impacted by that. So, and then, zooming out across the province, we would see projects come online, some more innovation that are utility scale to meet the need. And because I really felt left out as a nation when I came into this role 6 years ago, but even prior to that we didn't have a lot of energy projects in the territory. We had this series of dams that were put in there in like 1947. And so, energy business is something I've always wanted to be involved in, and renewable clean energy business, what it means for First Nations, it's transformational. We really need to be ought to be the ones to see the major benefit out of that. And I think that's what's truly going to help uplift us and create some independent wealth and income that we can invest into growing our communities and build houses and ensure we have clean water and invest in training education of our children. So I would just really like to see a lot more projects come online. I applaud the BC government and BC Hydro for its commitment to ensure the equity ownership. That's huge. That's listening to, we don't want the passive revenue share, royalty tax for projects from our territory. Some nations may opt for that because they assess the risk and it might not be for them. But when you have the opportunity to fully understand the risk, to have the support of an infrastructure loan program like CIB to help that investment, then why would you not take that? And so I really hope to see in a year's time that there's a lot more projects coming online and more First Nations communities able to participate and benefit from it.
Yeah, I think picking up on a number of those themes and points, in a year's time, we'll have had another call for power. So seeing more projects, First Nations as full partners benefiting and shaping those projects. And the 2024 call, as Cole touched on, every project, because it was required, had First Nations equity ownership, but what was really exciting was 8 of those had 51% ownership. What I'd love to see in the next call, but in all cases it was one First Nation, what I'd love to see in the next call is a partnership that involved 2, 3, multiple nations on a single project, and I think that would go a long way to spreading the benefits, and then also really supporting that partnerships in shared territory.
For Innergex, what success looks like to us is obviously more projects, but I think for us, we look at success as more projects across the board. For all of our colleagues, the sector, nations, and just really leaning into the opportunity. Success also looks like movement and progress on transmission bottlenecks. I'd love to see movement on the First Nations equity financing framework. I know that was something that was introduced, and we'd love to see more done on that front. And I think we'd love to feel the excitement coming from community. I know that there's been a lot of dialogue, but wanting to see communities feeling heard, excited, and empowered with the 2025 call and further opportunities are coming down the pipe in renewable energy. That's what success looks like to me.
Thank you all. Those are great answers. I really appreciate your experience, your insight, your expertise, all your work in this. We have a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. And it's a real privilege to work with you on meeting those challenges. And as Dallas said yesterday, we had to dialogue. We had to work through those things together. So thank you for your continued leadership in clean energy. And now we do have a few exciting announcements. So Chief Roberts, I'm going to pass it over to you to kick us off.
Thank you, Cole. Yeah, it's a great honor to be announcing that as the chair of the inaugural First Nations Steering Committee of Clean Energy BC, to be involved in a project and to learn so much about renewable energy and wind in particular, and to be asked to be a part of this. It's a great I think a vision and commitment that your mother had set out, Judith Sayers, when she was the chair of Clean BC. And so to see it now come back, it's really needed. And I'll let you speak to more of the details, and I think there's some questions on it, but there's going to be the first meeting of that steering committee right after this panel. We'll probably take a picture and stuff, and I should look at my notes to see what room it's in. But
Nanaimo River. The Nanaimo River room. So when you come up at the elevators, you go across like the little walkway, and we're over to the left. And there's many questions here that we didn't get to. There's a lot of questions that you might have. We would love to be that forum for you. So if you're a First Nation or you're a First Nations designated representative, please join us. The First Nations can become members of the association. Capacity building is a priority for us. So please join us for that meeting. If you can't make it today, we'll have more. But these types of discussions are exactly what we want to do, because we want to take that feedback and incorporate as much as we can.
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit more as far as what I see as the opportunity and the need for the steering committee now for First Nations to come together to share information. It was just by my network that I was able to get that, again, that confidence to kind of understand these projects more fully. But when we can come together as a broader group then and put our heads together and share our experiences, it's really impactful for us to be able to use those voices to help shape clean energy policy, and advocacy, and partnerships. It was that type of work that Cole and his team did, and Jack Magnus and the folks all at Clean Energy BC to provide that input to BC Hydro to help shape these calls. And it's been transformational how they've been rolled out. And it's an amazing start. And we want you guys to come on board to help with that and share your experiences so we can be an even more powerhouse and make sure that First Nations are taking their rightful place in these clean energy projects as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great place to end. And I'd like to call up Sarah Weber. Clean Energy BC, we're proud to participate in this conference and to be a sponsor. And we are very proud to work with C3 Alliance. And we're going to announce a MOU signing that we're going to continue this collaboration, and we're very honored. So over to you, Sarah.
On now? Is it on now? How about now? Now? Can you guys hear me now? Oh, there we go. Super. Well, while they're taking that photo, I guess I just wanted to add a couple words to Cole's words there. And we're really pleased that C3 is able to sign this MOU with Clean Energy BC. I think both of our work is rooted in Indigenous reconciliation and fostering collaboration and connections. And so through some of our events like this one and the BC Natural Resources Forum, Generate, and the First Nations Leadership Energy Summit, which I am going to get super smooth at advertising after this MOU is signed. So anyways, thank you so much to our partners at Clean Energy BC. Okay, and I've gotten the clear, so everyone will come back at 10:20, where we've got a really amazing panel that you're definitely going to want to see. So please, take a brief break, and we'll see you back here. Thanks so much.
Didn't want to be presumptuous.